Right, so when we left off, we were talking about how natural selection only acts on the genes that are present. Well, now we're going to talk about what happens, what we see in evolution. So, when one species adapts to its environment, it will begin to accrue adaptations. And it may develop enough that it is no longer visually or genetically or behaviorally compatible with its original parent population. And thus you may end up with a new species. If we expected, adaptations in a population to be capable of accruing enough to the point of producing additional species, we would expect to see a tree of life in which animals share similar features, and you can trace back physiological and behavioral features through related lines. And in fact, when we talk about how an animal evolved from another one, when we talk about humans evolved from apes, that's not quite how it works. See, humans evolved from ape-like ancestors. But when we say the word apes, we specifically mean chimpanzees and gorillas and orangutans, right? Those are apes. Humankind did not evolve from apes. We evolved from something similar to apes. In fact, we evolved from an organism that was both related to modern apes and us. Since we share heritage with modern apes and us, we call that ape-like ancestor a common ancestor. Common ancestry is basically saying life shares common ancestors. The points where populations diverged are points where we had a common ancestor. And those ancestors adapted to different environments. And depending on the environments to which they adapted, different genes became more or less common. If they were good enough to live, they lived. When we look at evolution, we look at a map of common ancestry in species today, in all the species today. For instance, when we talk about humans and chimps sharing evolutionary heritage, we talk about humans and chimps sharing a common ancestor. Saying humans evolved from apes is kind of like you saying I came from my uncle. My uncle became me. That's ridiculous. You are related to your uncle, but you have to go back in the family line a ways to find that, right? You came from your parents, and your parents came from their parents. Your uncle came from them as well. You trace back into your family tree to find your ancestors. Well, common ancestors work the same way, just at an entirely larger level. So when we look for evidence of evolution, we're going to look for common ancestry. And we can find common ancestry in fossils. We find missing links between species all the dang time. All the time. It's not uncommon to find some link between two different species. And that's amazing considering less than 1% of all life is fossilized. Fossils represent a tiny snapshot of the amount of life that was on this planet and the diversity of life that was on this planet. Not every single species that ever lived has been fossilized. So, the fact that when we look at fossil evidence, we find evolutionary links all the time is pretty epic. Dinosaurs and birds is a great example of finding evolutionary links. Archaeopteryx is a bird-like dinosaur. Here it is right there. Notice any shared features between Archaeopteryx and modern birds? See those feathers there? look well adapted to flapping, moving through the air. Yeah, bird-like feet. How about with dinosaurs? Well, it's got a pretty long tail. We can see claws here. And on the head, we can see sharp teeth. Archaeopteryx shares features of dinosaurs and birds. It is a common ancestor of birds and dinosaurs. So, here's a pretty cool picture right here. This is a map of common ancestry of dinosaurs and birds. And so, whenever you see these little forks here, this point, this pink point, or this little point here is the last common ancestor. So, living birds and Archaeopteryx shared a common ancestor here. And then living birds and dromaeosaurids, like Velociraptor, living birds and Velociraptor shared a common ancestor, further back in their past than with Archaeopteryx. So you can see sort of the evolutionary branches that occurred. You can see how closely related living birds are to other dinosaurs. So tyrannosaurids, way down here. Living birds are much more closely related to Archaeopteryx, dromaeosaurids, and oviraptorosaurs than they are tyrannosaurids. But they're still related. They still share common ancestry. You have to go further back. So think of it like a family tree. So what's cool to notice here is living birds share evolutionary ancestry with predatory dinosaurs. That's right. These are all our lame plant-eating dinosaurs, all those little wussies that eat grass and leaves. No, birds of today are descendants of predators. Yeah. In fact, there are scientists who now classify birds as dinosaurs. How about more missing links? Hominid evolution. So we've seen some pretty nice missing links between birds and dinosaurs. What I failed to mention here is right here, hand bones. So the phalanges are your finger bones in people. And so this is showing common ancestry through phalanges. So the similarity of finger bones. And so we can see Archaeopteryx phalanges and living birds phalanges much more closely similar than dromaeosaurids. And you can go through these phalanges to look at the differences. And you can see how related these guys are. So you can look at physiological similarities between different kinds of bones and fossils. Speaking of missing links, how about hominid evolution? Everybody knows this picture, right? Bam! Hominid evolution. That's not how it works. Unfortunately, this picture, no matter how famous, is kind of a crappy illustration of hominid evolution because it implies that chimps evolved into men. And you see right there, chimp, sort of ape-like, sort of apish, human, man-like, more man-like, much more man-like, and then modern man, right? It looks like this just nice, neat progression from chimp to modern man. And this picture here leads to questions like when I was in 9th grade and I did an informative speech about evolutionary theory, and I had someone yell up and say, "Hey! If evolution is real, how come chimps aren't turning into people?" And the answer, of course, is because this is hominid evolution, with all of these being separate species of hominids that existed on our planet. And you can chart back our common ancestry. The further back you go, the further we are from each other. So, chimps aren't even on this chart here. This is just hominids. Hominids are a group of ape-like organisms that stand on two legs. And so these are hominids. We are hominids right here. This is Homo sapiens. Here's Homo neanderthalensis. Neanderthals are hominids. Here's Homo heidelbergensis. That's a hominid. Homo erectus over here is a hominid. Homo antecessor, these are all hominids. We share common ancestry with these. We didn't evolve from Homo heidelbergensis. Rather, we share a common ancestor with Homo heidelbergensis. Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis share common ancestry. We didn't evolve from one another. That's actually pretty wild, by the way, that Neanderthals were a separate species of man. How cool is it to wrap your mind around that fact? Think about that for just a moment. Neanderthals were a different species of living, thinking, talking, walking, art-making man. And our species of man, Homo sapiens, lived at the same time as Homo neanderthalensis. Granted, most of the time we didn't travel in the same places. Africa versus Northern Europe. Neanderthals, by the time modern man was making a big splash on the scene, Neanderthal populations were already decreasing significantly. And so there's only a few places where they probably interacted. But still, Evolution song? Yeah. We should play that before I'm done. Anyway, Homo sapiens, there was a time when Homo sapiens interacted with Neanderthals. And that's pretty epic. It's thought that Neanderthals died off in part because Homo sapiens may have killed them off. But that's not all. They weren't as well adapted to the changing world. However, Homo sapiens is excessively good at their evolutionary imperative, and Homo neanderthalensis looked a lot like Homo sapiens. And so, the good news is, although Homo neanderthalensis, that noble species of hominid, has disappeared from the world for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, we still carry them in our genes, because modern man did the nasty with Neanderthals and brought their genes into our population. I did genetic sequencing, and I think I'm something like, I carry 4% Neanderthal genes. So 4% of my genes can be traced back to Neanderthal, which is pretty cool. Okay, so these are hominid skulls. Just go ahead and look at it and tell me how none of these have any kind of link to one another. Yeah, you can. Because honestly, you want missing links? I got missing links. Look at these hominid skulls. Every single one of these is identified to a separate species of hominid. Why would they all look so similar if there wasn't common ancestry? If we didn't share ancestors with these different species, we didn't share evolutionary history with them, why would we see such preserved features? Okay, how about modern evidence of evolution? Fossils, again, only 1% of any living species ended up fossilized. 1% of all living species ended up fossilized. So there are whole species that may not have been fossilized. So how about modern evidence of evolution? Well, we have homologous structures. These are structures that are present throughout animal life. Specific bones are highly common from extinct four-limbed fish through all modern vertebrates. Vertebrates are animals with spines and skeletons. Tetrapods were fish with skeletons and spines that had 4 limbs. And we can actually trace common bones: the humerus, the radius, and the ulna. These are bones. The humerus is this bone here, your arm bone. And then the radius and ulna are the 2 bones that make up your forearm. And when we look at fossils of Eusthenopteron, a 4-limbed fish, we could see a humerus, a radius, and an ulna. And then if you look at all these different organisms, you can see these bones present in all of them. Why would you have common bone structure if there wasn't evolutionary ancestry? So these are anatomical similarities that are pretty hard to deny, that at some point birds and lizards shared common ancestry, that they evolved from a common ancestor. Otherwise, why would they have such a similar setup to their bones? Vestigial structures are another great way to get a view of evolution. Vestigial structures are organs or structures with zero function. They have no function anymore. But they had a function in a common ancestor. Ostriches still have wings. Ostriches do not fly. But ostriches shared common ancestry with flying birds. Ostriches are a flightless bird that lost the ability to fly. And so, while they still show wings, they are functionless. However, those wings are evidence that ostriches shared common ancestry with flying birds. Whales and dolphins. Now, this is a really cool one. Whales and dolphins have a vestigial pelvis and femur. Here you go. If you look at this giant whale, this is called a right whale, or this is either a right whale or a bowhead. I can't tell based on the skeleton. But if you look at it, way back here in its tail, it has these bones. And if you look at them up close, you can see that they're what remains of a pelvis and a femur. So just to blow your mind, if you didn't know this already, whales and dolphins evolved from a land-dwelling ancestor. They evolved from terrestrial carnivores that adapted to water. How about biological evidence of a four-legged land-based ancestor? Bam! We'll look at skeletal morphology, which is the shape of bones and the position of bones, and we'll look at skulls. So here's bones right here, and we can look at the shape and position of these bones, of these different species. You can see this is a pretty active common ancestor here that had four legs and moved around pretty much obligately on land. And then over here we can see the pelvis is getting smaller, the leg bones are getting slimmer, indicative that there's less weight put on them. Here, both the front limbs and the hind limbs are starting to be smaller, right? You've got less importance in these limbs. Then we have Rhodocetus here with a elongated skull. And see, we also see similarities in the skulls in whales and dolphins and these ancestors here. So eventually what we get is Rhodocetus with these reduced back legs that look like they're pretty useless for moving around on land, and they're highly reduced forelegs. And then we have extremely reduced Endorodon, and finally in baleen modern whales, you don't even see the hind legs anymore. So here's a shoulder blade and the humerus and radius ulna and the phalanges, the finger bones. And we can look at how they are different in fossils we've found. And we see that there are, in fact, still similarities in all of them. Why would we have a flipper that has finger bones, right? Look at that. There are finger bones in this whale flipper, if not for the fact that this whale evolved from a terrestrial organism that had paws. So here's skulls of modern dolphins right here. Here's a modern dolphin skull, and here's a fossil skull. We can see pretty distinct similarities between a modern dolphin and a Endorodon skull, especially in the jaws here. And then we still see those similarities in Rhodocetus. And in Rhodocetus, we also see limbs. And over here in Pakicetus, We still see some similarities in the bone structure of the skull, and we see some very distinct hind limbs. The closest living land animal to which whales are related is the hippopotamus. Pretty awesome. So here we go. Here's some skeletons that we have. Pakicetus, which was terrestrial. Rhodocetus, which was predominantly aquatic. Dorodon, which was fully aquatic. And Balena, which is a recent whale ancestor. Hard to actually tell the difference between Balena and a modern whale. So you can see we have the pelvis and hind limb here being reduced in size and importance over time. And so we have this shared ancestry between whales and terrestrial animals. Pretty awesome. Sometimes there's a mutation in embryonic development that activates a biological pathway involved in developing legs. And you get dolphins that have limb buds. And that right there is a mutation that caused hind limb buds to grow in a dolphin. Whatever's left of the genetic information that says grow back legs was activated. And this is what a dolphin grew. How cool is that? All right, I'm going to take a break here for a moment and make some food. I have been making my ghee, which I took butter and I boiled it in a pan, a saucepan on low, until the milk fats fell to the bottom of the saucepan and just barely browned. And I've been filtering it with a coffee filter so that I get only the butter behind. This is because I let the milk fats brown. It's ghee. I doubt it's some actual traditional recipe, but I like Indian clarified butter, so I'll make it as easily as possible. And so this is my Indian clarified butter. You can see I've got a whole bunch of milk fats left behind on here that have browned up. And so this stuff is going to be left out of there. So I've actually reduced the fat content of my butter. I won't kid myself in thinking it's healthy. The reason I did this is because tonight I'm making salmon. No, you do not have to know any of this. And yes, I'm ending the video after I finish talking about my salmon. So if you don't want to learn about my salmon meal tonight, press stop and you're not missing anything. So this is my frozen salmon because I'm living on a budget. I've defrosted it in the sink under cold water because that's one of the easiest, kindest ways to defrost something without cooking it or breaking it to pieces. And I'm going to make salmon that is poached and a white wine reduction. I'm using ghee because it gets rid of a little bit of fat. And depending on how you make it, it tends to have sort of a almost nutty flavor to it. So I'm going to add, I don't know how much, probably a quarter cup or so. Enough to coat the bottom of the pan and maybe a little less than a quarter inch of butter. Now I'm going to add white wine. Just probably a quarter to a half cup of white wine. Get a whole bunch of fluid in there. Here comes my lemon juice because I want to add a nice lemon flavor to this. Again, I'm probably going to add maybe a quarter cup of lemon juice to this. So, a whole lot actually, because I want that lemon flavor to come through. And if it's not fresh lemons, if it's this grocery store lemon juice in a can thing, it's not necessarily super tasty. I'm going to turn this on heat to, I'll make it medium low. So I've got my ghee, my white wine, and my lemon juice in there. Now I'm going to add some basic spices to it. I like tarragon. It has almost a licorice-like flavor to it. So I'm going to add some of that in there. I don't know, maybe a quarter teaspoon. Coriander seed. It complements the lemon flavor quite well. Again, maybe a quarter teaspoon or so. I just shake it in there, however. Might even be as much as a half. All my seasonings are pretty much like a quarter to a half a teaspoon here. Cardamom, again, a nice complementary flavor to the lemon. A little bit of mint, because I like mint, and again, that's going to bring out some of that flavor. Could probably reduce the seasonings, but I love seasonings so much. They make being poor easier. Touch of dill weed just to bring the flavor down a little bit. Maybe not spice it too heavily in the direction of the sort of minty, citrusy direction. Then I'll add a little bit of good old standard pepper. Not a ton. This is probably more in the range of 1/8 of a teaspoon, like a pinch. And about that much of salt. Maybe even less. Just a little pinch of salt. Give it some flavor. I'll leave garlic alone. I don't need garlic. Stir that up a little. Buttery. And let's see, I'll also go ahead and add a pinch of herbs from Provence, herbs de Provence. Just a French seasoning blend I like. It's got some like lilac flowers in it and stuff. It's pretty tasty. So again, maybe a quarter to a half teaspoon of that. Stir it up, and I'm just going to essentially heat this over medium-low until it starts to get hot and come to a boil. And I'm also going to add my salmon to the dish. So here's one fillet. And here's 2 fillets. Let's see. And I just set them in there. And basically I'm just going to boil them in my sauce. And as the sauce boils, the volume will decrease. And so right now they're pretty well submerged in there. But as it boils and cooks the salmon, it'll impart its flavor into it. And it will also decrease the volume of the sauce until it thickens up some more. So that's pretty much my salmon. So make it yourself. It's tasty.